Are sneaker prices just too damn high? We're going to get into that this time on Fire Footwear. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Fire Footwear. As always, I am your host, Matt. I want to welcome you back this week if this is not your first time, and I want to thank you if this is your first time. Last week was the first time that we debuted a video component of this podcast, both on Apple, Spotify, and I also put some up on YouTube. I will say that I did get a lot of great responses, and people seem to like having a little bit different of a look. Apparently, video podcasting is pretty big now, and people like to see the face of the person that is talking to them. So for audio listeners, video listeners, however you consume this, I want to thank you, and I want to thank you for the stellar start to the video era of Fire Footwear. Now, one great thing about this is on YouTube, I received a comment that talked about something that they wanted to hear from me about. They were very complimentary about last week's episode regarding Nike SB, but they wanted to hear more about my thoughts on sneaker prices. Sneaker prices have been a topic of conversation now for quite a while. They've been a topic of conversation because I believe right now the United States economy and even the global economy to a certain extent is not where it was probably 5, 6, 7 years ago. I think people are feeling the effects of many policies and just many events that are happening in the world. And I think they're feeling it in their pockets. And what ends up happening when that happens is we tend to take a more granular look at what we are spending our money on, and not just what we're spending our money on, but I think the prices that these companies are making the commodities that we like to purchase and critiquing them a little bit. One of the reasons why this came up in the first place is because a few weeks back, maybe a month ago, the Jordan 11 that always comes out every single December or holiday season here in the States, that was rumored to be, I think it was $255. And I think many folks felt as if that was a bridge too far. And again, we generally tend to take a more granular look at prices whenever something like this happens. Turns out that wasn't going to be the price. They're still going to remain what they actually are. But this commenter wanted to hear my thoughts on sneaker prices. If you go back in the archives, you will find an episode that I did maybe 2 years ago that broke down where sneaker prices were at that time, but compared them to the prices that they were when they debuted, and also providing an element of inflation in here. Because what we tend to do, and as somebody who works in statistics and majored in economics, I generally will look at the pricing of things, think that it might feel high in the moment, but try and take in all of the contextual information that needs to come into play when thinking about what that price means in 2025 or 2026. And so when you look at sneaker prices today, I think you generally find that people will look at them in a vacuum and they will compare them to their financial status at that time. Not all prices are created equal, and not all increasing prices are created equal as well. And so what I did is I went back and looked at some of the most prominent Jordan brand and Nike silhouettes, take a look at what they cost when they debuted, and also taking a look at what they cost now, but also factoring in other elements that have happened in the global and US economy. So let's start with the Jordan 1. We all know that the Jordan 1 debuted in 1985. Right now, it is $180, and that is a lot of money. Objectively, $180 is a lot of money, and I also think that we should preface where we are by saying that sneakers are a luxury item. It is not something that we need to survive. It is not something that is critical in our lives. It is, in my opinion, a first world object, and it is a luxury object that we don't have to have, but we choose to have in the quantities that we have them. Do shoes make a difference in a utilitarian sense in our daily lives? They 100% do. Do we need $180 Jordan 1s or other Jordan models to do that? No, of course not. We can go out and buy cheap shoes, and we can use them, run them into the ground, and then get another pair of cheap shoes. We choose to be a part of sneakers, and we choose to spend the money that we spend. But if we're going to make that assumption, let's look at the pricing. So $180, objectively a lot of money for people. When they debuted, they were $65. And again, if you look at those two numbers comparatively, you think, wow, that is a huge jump. That's insane. How could they be that expensive? But if you adjust for inflation, that $65 would be $185 today. So in theory, the $180 that we're being asked to spend on your generic Jordan 1 is right around where the price would be if you think about inflation. So that price actually makes sense in the way that you look at it as it relates to inflation and how inflation causes prices to increase. You could obviously argue, should inflation make that much of a difference? And that's not for this pod, but you get my point. The Air Jordan 4, I would say, is another silhouette. And when it debuted in 1989, $110. And that's pretty awesome because $110, even though $65 was a much lower price, $110 objectively sounds great. In 1999, when they retroed a Jordan 4 for the first time, it was $100. So the price actually went down. And then in 2004, somewhere between $115 to $125. Again, going up incrementally. What is it today? Well, today it is around $225 for some of your Jordan 4s. And that price jump feels pretty large. But again, it's under inflation if you talk about what it currently would be. If you are putting inflation on this, it'd be about $19 on what the inflation adjusted price would be. So while the price is high objectively by today's standards and what we can afford, it is still under or close to what inflation would dictate. So in that regard, the prices are high, but they're not as high as they could be. And then we get to the Jordan 11. Let's look at the Concord, for example. It was flat at $125 through 1995 through 2001. So a 6-year period, there was no movement in the price. And it's $220 by 2018. So a pretty significant jump in that time frame. But it's the only Jordan model that actually is priced above inflation adjusted numbers. And that's pretty significant, except when you look at the fact that it's $6 over. Most of us go out and spend $6 on a coffee somewhere, and so we can afford that little bit of a bump if we're already paying $200+ for a shoe. So while that $255 is higher than inflation, and it is definitely a high price for a sneaker today, especially for an OG model of a shoe that isn't a collaboration, doesn't have special features or special materials, I understand where people are coming from. But I think overall, if you look at some of the most popular Jordans, they have stayed at or just under what inflation has adjusted for their price. If you look at some of the other Nike models, Air Max 1, Air Max 90, those have stayed close to what they are in terms of inflation adjusted numbers, but they have gone up, but they're well under what I would say would be an inflation adjusted number. If you look at today's run of Air Max 1s, about $140, $150, Air Max 90s, probably about in the same realm. They didn't debut for that much, but they were around $100 when they debuted, so not too terrible. But let's get to the Nike Dunk, because the Nike Dunk is another silhouette that I think people look at, and that is a flagship model for Nike. Nike SB specifically I want to look at, and we did talk about Nike SB last week and how I felt like they're falling off a little bit, but when it launched in 2002, 2003, somewhere between $60 and $75 for a Nike SB collab or a Nike SB Dunk, which is awesome. That's a great price, especially in 2002 when you think about 1985, what a Jordan 1 debuted at, and now you think about some of the greatest SBs of all time sitting in that price range early on. Pretty awesome. They've actually gone up to about $140 through $160 today, which is a pretty significant increase. But again, I still think that it sits kind of sort of underneath what inflation would tell you. And while I think that what we're getting for our price isn't what we used to, they're sitting about what you would think that they would. So Nike SB Dunks have gone up a lot. And when you see that price tag of $140 to $160, it is a lot for a Nike Dunk Low, but again, reasonable. Other Nike models, Pegasus, those have actually stayed kind of where they are, and running shoes have gone up because the technology has gone up. But I think Nike overall, while they have adjusted prices, I do think that they've done a pretty good job of keeping it about what inflation adjustment would be. But let's look at some other models, because I think people focus their ire on Nike because the price hikes have looked more overt. But right now, let's think about some of the runners that are out there. Let's talk about New Balances for a minute, because New Balances are a brand that right now in the runner craze, people are buying because there's a lot of good names, there's a lot of great models, and New Balance has remained probably one of the top quality brands since its inception and since it started making the models that it does. But the 990, the 992, let's talk about those. In 1982, when the 990 came out, it was $100, and now the V6 is $200. And if you adjust for inflation, $100 in 1982 would be about $277 to about $300 today. So the 990 is actually significantly cheaper. So New Balance has done a great job with that. The 992, which you see a lot of Joe Freshgoods, you see some Salehi Bemburys, and you're talking about those holding the same again at about $199. And now collaborations are a little bit different, but it's got the same ceiling as the 990. So again, New Balance has done a great job in adjusting for inflation and keeping their prices low. And let's go to Adidas though, the Adidas Samba. It's really interesting because that shoe still kind of sits where it always has, somewhere between $100 and $120. And that price is actually more than fair when you think about all of the collabs and all of the GR and colorways that they have. You can get a Nike Samba now and really have it be your everyday wear. And I think that there is something to be said about the value that you're getting for that price. These brands keeping it low, making it something that you can actually feel as attainable. And I think that's where, when you look at these other brands, Nike is failing us a little bit because we're not getting the same quality for the same price. Nike is adjusting more than other companies, and I think that that is worth noting. But so now that we look at this, I think we can all look at this, and my opinion would be that prices are high. And I think when we look at the shoes that we want and the prices that we're paying, yes, they are higher. But I think we need to take a step back and look at the money that we're paying and think about where it's going. Where is it going? Well, what are some factors that are different, that are not related to the shoes in general or inflation? Well, I think one thing that is drastically different than what it was back in the 80s and even the 90s is celebrity endorsement, celebrity contracts. And I think Nike for sure has more expensive contracts than probably any other brand. Maybe you could say Adidas has some and so forth. But I think that's one thing, that one element that has gone into why shoes have increased, because Nike is paying, I would assume, a lot of money for your Travis Scotts and all of the athletes that they have under their brand. And I think that that notoriety is baked into the cost a little bit. So while Nike is staying about at the inflation adjusted price, we are paying more for Nikes across the board than others, because I believe that Nike, with its higher ceiling in terms of notoriety, I think that Nike is upping their prices because of that. And I think we are paying that. We're footing the bill for that. Is that fair? I don't know. But we're also buying all the Travis Scotts. We're buying a lot of the PEs. So there's something to be said about our participation in that. But what are some other factors? Well, in 2025, and we talked about this, tariffs have had a lot to do with price increases. The United States has put a lot of tariffs on goods that are coming in from other countries. And while some leaders will tell you that the consumer is not being passed that price increase, we are being passed that price increase. Not a political statement, just a statement of fact. When I started doing my regular job and started working in statistics, I worked in trade statistics. I've seen what happens when tariffs are applied. It's something that gains revenue, but who's going to pay that? The companies will pay it up front, and they're going to pass that to their consumer. And Nike has started doing that. Now, some of those price increases have only been like $5 across the board. So it's not a terrible increase, but we are getting past that every little increment. And I think that that's worth noting because it is something that has happened. But here's the thing. It's not just about inflation. It's not just about looking at the price and saying, okay, well, Nike has done a good job of keeping the inflation adjusted price about what it should be, and other brands have done a great job of staying below that. But another factor is what median income has happened, but also housing. I think that's one part of it that is not talked about enough. So the median income in 1985 was around $23,000 for a household. And when you think about that, you're like, wow, that's not a lot of money. But again, when you think about what that money went toward back in the day, that's probably not too bad. Now it sits around $85,000, and that is a significant increase. But let's think about that for a minute. If you had a household with 2 people and a child, $85,000, what would that get you? Not a lot. So while income has gone up 3.5 times since 1985, the other part of it is housing, and that's gone up 5 times. So the cost of housing has gone up about 1.5 times more than the cost of our income or our median household income. That's huge. That means that we are spending more to have shelter. We're spending more to be in a place and have a place to live, whether that's rent, whether that is a house that we own. And so when these prices go up for Nike and these prices go up for other brands and other commodities, we feel that more. Because while maybe we didn't feel it overtly at the time that it happened, it's happened gradually, it's happened incrementally. For many of us, I know my parents, my father was making not a lot of money, or at least objectively based off of what you think about a lot of money is today. And I wonder what his salary would be today and whether they could have afforded to only have one income back then. Because would they have been able to afford to buy a house? Would they be able to afford groceries? And even then, they were not scraping by, but they certainly were watching their money. And so what's the message here? Well, the message here is that prices have gone up. The message is that, yes, companies are taking advantage of us. They are giving us the same, if not a little bit lesser quality for more money. But when you look at the numbers, they're sitting at about what inflation would predict. And so while that is noble and they're not gouging us, at least not overtly, we are getting less for our money because we see more stories than not of quality going down. The ideas that are coming out of Nike are going down. Their connection to us has gone down as well. But on top of that, the rest of the world is expensive. Housing is expensive. Groceries are expensive. Our everyday needs and necessities, the prices of those have gone up the same, if not more, than, say, Nikes or New Balances. I think that's the difference. I think we can't look at the prices of sneakers in a vacuum. I think we need to look at them in the context of what's going on in the world, in the context of inflation, in the context of policies, everything. Everything is more expensive. Sneakers are a luxury. I want to put that out there again. We don't have to buy them. We don't have to have them, but we choose to have them. And so when you choose to have them, it's a responsibility of yours to make good decisions with your money. If $255 for a Jordan 11 is a bridge too far, then consider it a bridge too far. To me, that's a mature decision. You're making a good decision with your money to say, that's too much for me. For some, they spend money on the shoes no matter what, and maybe at the detriment of other portions of their life. Maybe they are living paycheck to paycheck because they are spending so much on sneakers. That's not for me to adjudicate. It's not for me to judge. It just is, everybody has a different position in life. People make decisions, and we have decided that we want to be a part of this culture. We have decided that sneakers are something that we love and we want to have them. But I think what it comes down to is looking at your financial situation, looking at your responsibilities, and then looking at the prices of things that we want that are not necessities, like sneakers, and saying, can I afford that? Should I afford that? And then making a decision there. So my feeling on prices is that they have gone up. The companies will always take advantage of us to get their maximum revenue stream going. But at the end of the day, we still have the power. We have the power because we can choose to buy or not. We can choose to spend our money. We can choose to pay the higher prices. And that right there is really what it comes down to. Remember, you have the power, you can vote, and you should vote with your wallet and make decisions that are right for you. Hope this finds everybody well. I hope this finds everybody safe, and I'll talk to you next time. This is Fire Footwear.